Jackson Creed had a talent for getting himself into trouble, not the fatal kind usually, more like the kind that involved running from hulking aliens with too many limbs and not enough sense. Today it was the latter. He ducked behind his rickety stall at the edge of the Starlight Bazaar, clutching a box that hummed ominously. Forbidden tech. Illegal, sure. Dangerous? Absolutely. A good time, always. The bazaar was alive with the cacophony of 1,000 different species trying to sell their junk for too much or buy someone else's junk for too little. Overhead, the artificial sky was a depressing shade of gray, like an accountant's soul. "You'd think they'd spring for better weather," Jackson muttered to himself, glancing at the flickering neon sign above his stall that read Creed's Curiosities. The sign had seen better days, much like Jackson. His neighbor, a reptilian trader with scales that looked suspiciously like rust, hissed as he passed. "More trouble, Creed. What is it this time?" "Just another day in paradise, Slith," Jackson replied, not bothering to hide the sarcasm. He always got along well with Slith, if only because neither of them trusted each other as far as they could throw a rogue asteroid. From the corner of his eye, Jackson spotted his latest headache trundling towards him, Grax, a bounty hunter with a face only a mother could love, provided she was blind and had a thing for mashed potatoes. "Creed," Grax barked, his voice like gravel in a blender. "I know you've got it. Hand over the box." "What, this old thing?" Jackson lifted the box, pretending it was a harmless trinket rather than a ticking time bomb of galactic proportions. "It's just a paperweight." "Well, if paper still existed." Grax wasn't amused. "Council doesn't like their toys on the loose. Last chance before I decide to redecorate your stall with your innards." Jackson grinned, the kind of grin that said he had no plan but was too stubborn to admit it. "You're going to need more than threats, Grax. I don't scare easy." "Then you're as dumb as you look," Grax replied, his patience thinner than Jackson's profit margins. "True," Jackson admitted, sidestepping as Grax lunged. "But at least I have my good looks to fall back on. You got nothing." The chase was on. Jackson ducked and weaved through the crowd, knocking over stalls and angering vendors who shouted colorful curses in languages most polite society didn't acknowledge. The bazaar was a maze, but it was Jackson's maze. He knew every shortcut, every hidden alley that led to a potential escape route or, more likely, another problem. As he slipped into a narrow alley, he could hear Grax's heavy footfalls behind him. The hunter wasn't fast, but he was persistent, like a bad smell. "You know," Jackson called over his shoulder, "I didn't get involved in the illegal tech trade for the exercise. You should try a salad." "Funny, Creed, real funny." Grax's voice was closer now, too close for comfort. Jackson skidded to a halt at a dead end. The alley ended in a wall that seemed to say, "You're screwed," in a very final manner. He turned, ready to bluff his way out, but Grax was already there, blocking the only exit. "Nowhere to run," Grax grinned, if you could call it that. It was more like a bear trap showing its teeth. "I could take up flying," Jackson suggested, glancing upwards. Above, a rusted fire escape ladder hung just out of reach, mocking him. Grax laughed, a sound that made Jackson want to check for poison in his ears. "Nice try, Creed. Hand it over." Okay, Jackson sighed dramatically, holding out the box. "You win, but you might want to handle it carefully. It's sensitive." Grax took the box, suspicion etched all over his lumpy features. "Sensitive how?" Jackson shrugged. "Oh, you know, the usual. Emits a high-frequency pulse that fries neural circuits. Or it might just be full of old socks. Surprise." Grax looked at the box as if it had just grown teeth. "This is why no one likes humans, Creed. You're all crazy. And you're all predictable," Jackson snapped, darting past Grax while the big guy was busy contemplating his life's choices. The alley was narrow, but he managed to squeeze by, hearing Grax curse as he realized he'd been duped. Back in the open market, Jackson blended into the crowd, his heart racing faster than a spaceship on nitro. He ducked into another stall, grabbing a hat from a bemused vendor and jamming it onto his head. Disguise complete. "Nice hat," the vendor commented dryly, watching as Jackson tried to become part of the furniture. "Thanks. It's the latest fashion," Jackson replied, peeking over the edge of a particularly tall alien who resembled a cactus with a bad attitude. "Grax is going to kill you," the vendor said, more observation than concern. "Join the club," Jackson replied, scanning the crowd for signs of the hunter. "Apparently it's exclusive," the vendor chuckled. "What's in the box, Creed?" "A ticket to a world of hurt, probably," Jackson admitted. "Or the start of something interesting." The vendor raised an eyebrow, or what passed for an eyebrow on whatever species he was. "Interesting how?" Jackson leaned in, lowering his voice. "Word is the council's up to something big, bigger than their usual nonsense. This little beauty," he patted the box, "is part of it. And you're involved. Why?" "Because someone needs to look out for the little guy," Jackson said with mock sincerity. "And there's profit, mostly the profit." "You sure it's worth it?" Jackson thought about this for all of 2 seconds. "Probably not. But then, where's the fun in being safe?" The vendor shook his head, but there was a hint of a smile. "You're going to get yourself killed one day, Creed." "But not today," Jackson replied confidently, though his eyes continued to scan for any sign of Grax. He didn't see Grax, but what he saw was worse. A group of council enforcers, their uniforms as pristine as their reputations were sullied, moved through the bazaar, their presence as welcome as a leaky airlock. They were looking for something or someone. And Jackson had a sinking feeling it wasn't a bargain on fake jewelry. "Time to move," Jackson muttered, slipping away from the stall and disappearing into the crowd again. He needed a plan, and fast. The council's interest in his little treasure was bad news. The kind of news that usually ended with a shallow grave and a lot of unanswered questions. "Think, Jackson, think," he urged himself, darting between stalls and dodging shoppers. The bazaar was still bustling, blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding. He needed to find a safe place to stash the box, somewhere the council wouldn't think to look. Somewhere even he wouldn't think to look, which admittedly wasn't a high bar. Spying a rundown establishment that declared itself a bar in much the same way a broken faucet declared itself a fountain, Jackson grinned. Perfect. He slipped inside, the dim lighting doing wonders for his disguise, and headed straight for the back. The place reeked of desperation and spilled drinks, a comforting aroma in a way. "What can I get you?" the bartender asked, his voice as gruff as his beard was suspiciously bushy. "A hiding spot," Jackson replied, slipping him a few credits. The bartender nodded, pocketing the money without a word. "Back room's open. Just don't touch anything valuable," Jackson snorted. "Judging by the decor, that won't be a problem." In the back room, cluttered with more junk than a hoarder's attic, Jackson found a suitable spot under a pile of broken furniture. He stashed the box, covering it with enough debris to make it look like part of the decor. "See you soon, beautiful," he whispered, standing up and dusting off his hands. As he made his way back to the bar, the reality of what he'd done started to sink in. He was in deep, deeper than he'd ever been before. The council wasn't a forgiving entity, and playing games with them was like juggling plasma grenades. Back at the bar, he ordered a drink, something strong enough to burn away the realization of his own stupidity. "Here's to bad decisions," he said, lifting his glass in a mock toast to himself. The bartender grunted, unimpressed. "Just don't bring trouble here." "Me? Trouble? Never," Jackson replied with a smirk, taking a long sip. But even as he savored the burn of the cheap alcohol, he couldn't shake the feeling that the box was just the beginning of something much, much bigger. And probably not in a good way. He needed allies, someone who could help unravel the mess he'd stumbled into. But trust was a rare currency in these parts, and Jackson was bankrupt. "Guess I'm going shopping again," he muttered to himself, draining his glass and setting it down with a decisive thud. He stepped back into the bustling chaos of the bazaar, the thrill of the chase already coursing through his veins. Dangerous tech, shadowy councils, and probably a conspiracy or two. Just another day in the life of Jackson Creed. And if he played his cards right, it might just be a profitable one too. As he vanished into the crowd, the only thing more certain than the trouble he was in was the grin plastered across his face. Because despite everything, this was what he lived for. With a final glance over his shoulder, he melted into the throng, the shadows of the bazaar swallowing him whole. The hunt was on, and Jackson Creed was just getting started. The Starlight Bazaar was its usual symphony of chaos and hustle, a swirling pot of voices, smells, and the kind of conspicuous commerce that made you wonder what exactly was on the menu. Jackson Creed had just managed to extricate himself from one mess, which naturally meant he was about to step knee-deep into another. He was weaving through the crowd, mulling over his next move, when he collided with something. Or rather someone. The impact was like hitting a wall made of steel, wrapped in the gentlest suggestion of murder. "Watch it," a voice hissed, dripping with the kind of authority that suggested you should be very careful about what you did next. Jackson turned his head to find himself face to reptilian face with Archon Tvek, an alien who looked like the result of an unfortunate accident between a squid and a tank. "Apologies," Jackson replied, trying for charm but achieving more of a nervous tick. "I was just—" "You are Jackson Creed," Archon Tvek interrupted, his voice as smooth as sandpaper. "Dealer of forbidden technologies, thorn in the side of the council." Jackson grinned, though the amusement didn't quite reach his eyes. "I prefer entrepreneur, sounds more respectable." "Respectability is a shroud," Tvek replied, leaning in close, his breath like a mix of burned rubber and forgotten fish. "I have information that might interest you." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "I'm listening." "You possess a box of council origin." "Possess" is a strong word. "More like temporarily inconveniencing me." "That box," Tvek continued, ignoring Jackson's attempts at levity, "is part of something larger. The Council is not merely toying with technology. They are manipulating events across the galaxy. I have proof." Jackson crossed his arms, intrigued despite himself. "And you're telling me this because—" Tvek reached into his robes and produced a small, crystalline shard. It shimmered in the artificial light of the bazaar, casting fractured rainbows on the ground. "This is a data shard. It contains information that would unsettle those who sit comfortably in power." "Unsettling the powerful sounds like a hobby I could get behind," Jackson said, accepting the shard. "But why give this to me?" "Because you are expendable," Tvek replied with a toothy approximation of a smile. "And desperate. Flattery will get you everywhere," Jackson muttered, pocketing the shard. "So what am I supposed to do with this?" "Decode it. Spread the truth. Or do nothing and let the Council's shadow spread unchecked. The choice, as always, is yours." With that, Tvek turned and vanished into the crowd, leaving Jackson to ponder just how deep he was willing to dig his own grave. Back at his cramped quarters, Jackson sat hunched over a battered terminal, the data shard plugged into a makeshift port with more wires than a conspiracy theorist's yarn wall. The screen flickered to life, displaying lines of code that danced across the display like snakes in a pit. "Okay, let's see what secrets you're hiding," Jackson muttered to himself, tapping keys with the furious energy of someone who had no idea what they were doing but was determined to look competent. The code began to unravel, revealing snippets of data that were both intriguing and terrifying. Words like experimentation, population control, and galactic realignment popped up with alarming frequency. It seemed Tvek wasn't exaggerating after all. The Council was up to its eyeballs in wrongdoings that made Jackson's usual crimes look like unpaid parking tickets. "Well, Jackson," he mused aloud, "you've really stepped in it this time." As he delved deeper, he felt the hairs on the back of his neck prickle, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Paranoia was an occupational hazard in his line of work, but this felt different, more immediate. He glanced out the window, scanning the street below. Nothing seemed out of place. Just the usual detritus of life in the bazaar. Vendors hawking their wares, a questionable street performer juggling what looked suspiciously like live grenades, and a group of hooded figures that were definitely not a local book club. "Okay, that's not ominous at all," Jackson muttered, turning back to his screen. But even as he tried to concentrate, he couldn't shake the feeling that he just painted a target on his back. It wasn't long before the data was digested, and Jackson sat back, rubbing his eyes. The full picture was grim, and if he was honest, way above his pay grade. The council was orchestrating something monumental, with tentacles stretching further than he dared imagine. He needed help, allies, someone with more resources, more firepower, and ideally, less propensity for getting shot at. But alliances in his world were as stable as a house of cards in a hurricane. He needed someone as desperate and insane as he was. He was considering his options when the door burst open, and Slith slithered in, his scales glinting under the flickering light like an oil slick. "Jackson," Slith greeted, his voice a lazy drawl that suggested he found the whole universe mildly amusing. "Slith," Jackson replied, not bothering to hide his surprise. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I'm full of surprises," Slith said, eyeing the terminal with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "What's that?" "Evidence," Jackson replied, not elaborating. "Of some serious council mischief." Slith's eyes narrowed, the slits gleaming with something between interest and disbelief. "And you have this because—" "Tivek thought I'd make a good martyr," Slith chuckled, a harsh, rasping sound. "You're not that lucky." "Tell me about it," Jackson muttered. "Look, I need help, the kind that involves not dying." "Interested? Depends," Slith replied, coiling into a chair. "What's in it for me? How about we stick it to the council, expose their dirty laundry to the galaxy? Plus, I owe you one." Slith considered this, his tongue flicking thoughtfully. "I do like the idea of chaos. And a favor from you could be amusing." Jackson grinned, feeling a glimmer of hope for the first time since this whole debacle began. "Then let's cause some trouble." But even as they started plotting, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that they were sitting on a ticking time bomb, and the timer was running out. The next few hours were a blur of planning and paranoia, with Jackson and Slith outlining a scheme that was 1 part genius, 3 parts suicidal. If they could get the information out, make enough noise, maybe they could turn the council's attention away from the box and onto their own corruption. But first, they needed to move. "The market is going to be crawling with enforcers soon," Slith noted, peering through the grimy window like a lizard in a sunbeam. "We need a distraction." "Working on it," Jackson said, digging through a pile of gadgets he'd amassed over the years. Most were junk, but a few had potential. He pulled out a small device, a blinking, biplated contraption that looked like a cross between a toaster and a bomb. "What's that?" Slith asked, intrigued. "An EMP pulse generator," Jackson replied, brandishing it like a magician revealing his latest trick. "Should knock out the market's power long enough for us to slip out." Slith nodded, his tongue flicking in approval. "I like it. Chaos and confusion, your favorite flavor." "Exactly," Jackson said, grinning. "Let's get this party started." They moved quickly, slipping through the shadows like thieves in a particularly dark night. The bazaar was still bustling, the din of haggling and laughter masking their approach to the market's main power junction. Jackson set the device, adjusting wires and settings with a speed that would have impressed him if he weren't so busy trying not to panic. 5 minutes and this place goes dark," he said, stepping back and wiping sweat from his brow. "Let's not be here when it does," Slith replied, his body coiled with tension. As they made their way back through the throng, Jackson's mind whirled with possibilities. If this worked, if they could get out and get the data into the right hands, maybe they could turn the tide. Or at least create enough of a headache for the council to give him some breathing room. But nothing ever went as planned. Not in Jackson's world. The pulse exploded through the market like a wave, lights flickering and dying as the power cut out. The sudden plunge into darkness was met with shouts of surprise and panic, the crowd surging like a living thing, confused and directionless. Jackson and Slith moved through the chaos, slipping past enforcers and vendors, their path lit only by the occasional flash of emergency lighting. It was working, at least for the moment. As they reached the edge of the market, Jackson's heart pounded with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. They were almost free, almost clear. But almost was never enough. From the shadows, Grax emerged, his expression a mix of fury and grim determination. "Creed," he growled, blocking their path. "Great," Jackson muttered, backing up slightly. "Just what we need." "You're not leaving," Grax said, his voice a promise of violence. "Not with that data." Slith tensed beside Jackson, ready to strike, but Jackson held up a hand. "Listen, Grax, this isn't what you think. The Council's playing us all." "Save it," Grax snapped. "I don't care. Orders are orders." For a moment everything hung in the balance. The market still writhed with chaos behind them, the stakes higher than ever, and Jackson was all out of options. But then from the depths of his desperation came an idea. A foolish, reckless idea, but an idea nonetheless. "Grax," Jackson said, lowering his voice. "You know as well as I do that the Council doesn't give a damn about any of us, but you help us get this out. There's more money and glory in that than any bounty." Grax hesitated, the conflict clear in his eyes. It was a long shot, but Jackson had always been a gambler. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Grax nodded, his posture relaxing slightly. "Fine. But if this goes south, I'm taking you down with me." "Wouldn't have it any other way," Jackson replied with a grin, feeling the weight lift off his shoulders, if only a little. The three of them turned, slipping into the night together, a mismatched trio united by necessity and a shared enemy. The Council might have been powerful, but Jackson had learned one thing. When the chips were down, sometimes the only thing you had was each other. And sometimes, that was enough. Jackson Creed had always fancied himself a professional, which was a polite way of saying he was really good at not getting caught. But as he huddled in his cluttered quarters, surrounded by an assortment of gadgets that could get him a one-way ticket to a Council prison ship, he was beginning to suspect his luck had taken a vacation without telling him. The data shard he'd plugged into his terminal was a treasure trove of trouble. Each line of code, each snippet of information, was like a hand grenade just waiting to explode in his face. Words like genetic manipulation and planetary sterilization were enough to make his blood run cold. The Council wasn't just pulling strings, they were constructing a goddamn puppet show on a galactic scale. "Just peachy," Jackson muttered, rubbing his temples. "Why couldn't I have just stuck to smuggling energy cells?" His door rattled, and Jackson's hand instinctively reached for the blaster under his desk. But it was just Slith, his reptilian neighbor and occasional partner in crime, slithering in with all the stealth of a drunken lizard. "Jackson, you look like you're halfway to a full-blown existential crisis," Slith observed, his voice laced with that particular brand of sarcasm Jackson had come to associate with him. "You're not wrong," Jackson replied. "The Council's been busy playing God, and we're the ants under their magnifying glass." Slith peered at the terminal, his tongue flicking in and out. "You sure you weren't just reading some conspiracy theorists' bedtime stories? Next you'll tell me they're hiding the truth about the moon landings." "Huh, if only," Jackson said, glancing at the door again, his paranoia on overdrive. "Look, I've got a bad feeling about this. Like wake up with a gun to your head kind of bad." "Then why not leave?" Slith suggested with a shrug that somehow conveyed both indifference and understanding. "Find some quiet little corner of the galaxy and lay low." "Because they're onto me," Jackson said, the words sounding like a death sentence. "And because I have a conscience. It's faint, intermittent, but it's there." Slith let out a laugh that sounded like gravel being ground underfoot. "A conscience, in this economy? Yeah, well, it's a liability," Jackson admitted. "Which is why I need allies, real ones." "Allies, huh?" Slith cocked his head, eyes narrowing. "Hope you've got a good pitch, because you know how friendly folks around here aren't." "What's more compelling than saving your own skin?" Jackson asked with a grin that he hoped hid the desperation lurking beneath it. "True enough," Slith said, slithering into a chair. "So, what's the plan, oh fearless leader?" Jackson leaned back, contemplating his next move like a man playing chess with a pistol aimed at his head. "We find someone with enough sway to get this data out there, someone the Council can't just brush off." "And who might that be?" Slith's skepticism was palpable. Someone with more resources than sense, Jackson replied ominously. Which narrows it down to one or two maniacs in the entire galaxy. Before Slith could respond, their conversation was cut short by the unmistakable sound of heavy boots echoing down the corridor. Jackson's stomach twisted into knots as he realized that their time was up. "Gotta move," he said, grabbing a small pack filled with essentials, a blaster, a few data shards, and a thermal blanket with more holes than fabric, as he prepared for a less than dignified exit. Slith followed without question, his sleek form a comforting presence as they slipped out the back door into the starlit chaos of the bazaar. It was late, but the market never slept, a fact that would hopefully work in their favor. "Pretend we're just a couple of tourists looking for the universe's worst souvenirs," Jackson whispered, weaving through the throng of people and creatures, each with their own secrets and sins. "What kind of place sells those?" Slith asked, his eyes scanning for threats. "This one," Jackson replied, nodding to a stall selling what looked suspiciously like counterfeit council badges. Perfect for getting us into even more trouble. Their banter was cut short by the appearance of Grax, the bounty hunter who'd been dogging Jackson's trail ever since they'd crossed paths over a particularly messy arms deal. Grax stepped out of the shadows, his expression a mixture of annoyance and amusement. "Creed, it's your lucky day." "I doubt that," Jackson replied, his hand inching toward his blaster. "Easy," Grax said, holding up a hand. "I'm just here to chat." "Chat," Jackson echoed. "Since when do bounty hunters want to talk instead of shoot?" "Since I decided your head's not the prize it used to be," Grax replied, his gaze flicking to Slith and back to Jackson. "Besides, there's easier credits to be made." "How heartwarming," Jackson said dryly. "So why the sudden change of heart?" "Because the council's got its sights set on you and that makes you valuable," Grax explained, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "And that council box you've got, worth more than its weight in unobtainium." Jackson tensed. "What do you know about the box?" Grax shrugged, the motion causing his bulky armor to shift with a metallic clink. "Enough to know it's got the council running scared." "That's more than I know," Jackson admitted, unsure whether to feel relieved or more paranoid. "So you want to help us or just stand there looking menacing?" Grax considered this, his eyes narrowing. "I'll help, but only because watching the council squirm sounds like a good time." "Great." "Welcome to the party," Jackson said, clapping Grax on the shoulder like they'd been lifelong pals. "Now let's see just how badly we can ruin their day." With their numbers bolstered, they moved through the marketplace with a renewed sense of purpose. The bazaar was a labyrinth, all smoke and mirrors, perfect for slipping away unnoticed, if you knew the tricks. Jackson led them to the one place he knew they could find the kind of support they needed. A dive bar at the edge of the market, a place where the drinks were cheap and the patrons cheaper. As they entered, the dimly lit interior was filled with the sounds of off-key music and laughter that had more to do with the alcohol than anything genuinely funny. The patrons were a mix of smugglers, traders, and those who'd long ago given up on polite society. "Perfect," Jackson muttered, scanning the room for anyone who looked like they might be interested in causing trouble. "Time to make some new friends." Slith slid up to the bar, his scales catching the light as he ordered something that looked as toxic as it smelled. "You sure about this plan?" "Not at all," Jackson replied, leaning against the bar. "But when you're caught between the council and a hard place, you improvise." Their conversation was interrupted by a loud crash from the back of the bar, followed by a familiar, booming voice that could only belong to Archon Tvek, the alien who resembled a mix between a squid and a tank. The Archon moved through the room with an authority that demanded attention, his eyes locking onto Jackson with unsettling precision. "Creed," he called, his voice like gravel being ground underfoot. "We need to talk." "Of course we do," Jackson muttered under his breath, glancing at Slith and Grax. "Looks like the circus is in town." He approached the Archon, trying to look more confident than he felt. "Archon Tvek, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "Pleasure is subjective," Tivek replied, his tone as dry as a desert, and in this case irrelevant. Sounds about right, Jackson said, crossing his arms. So what's this about? The council's not happy with your recent activities, Tivek said, his eyes narrowing. And they've sent me to resolve the situation. Great, Jackson said, glancing back at his companions who were quietly edging toward the exit. I'm all ears. Not here, Tivek said, his gaze sweeping the room. Too many ears. Right, Jackson agreed, nodding toward a private room in the back. Lead the way. As they moved, Jackson couldn't help but wonder if he was leading them into a trap. But as they settled, Tivek wasted no time getting to the point. The council box, Tivek began, his voice low. It's more dangerous than you realize. Isn't everything? Jackson replied, trying to keep his tone light. Yes, Tivek said, his patience clearly wearing thin. But this isn't just about you. The box contains data that could tear the galaxy apart. That bad? Jackson asked, his bravado slipping. Worse, Tivek confirmed. And the council will stop at nothing to get it back. Which means we're all expendable, Jackson said, the reality sinking in. Precisely, Tivek agreed. But if you can get this data out, make it public, it might just be what we need to append their plans. Jackson exchanged a look with Slith and Grax. So, you're saying we stick our necks out and maybe we get to keep our heads? Something like that, Tivek replied, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his wide mouth. Well, Jackson said, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. Looks like we've got a revolution to start. With their path set, Jackson couldn't ignore the lingering feeling that they were stepping into the unknown, a leap of faith in a universe where faith was a currency, too often spent and rarely returned. But if there was one thing Jackson had learned, it was that sometimes, when the odds were stacked against you, the only option was to play the fool's hand and hope the universe had a sense of humor. Jackson Creed had always believed the galaxy was a giant cosmic joke. The punchline: him, standing in a decrepit dive bar, preparing to save it. He surveyed the room like a man searching for a lifeboat on a sinking ship, his anxiety masked by the kind of confidence that only comes from having no other options. Creed, you look like you just crawled out of a black hole, a voice drawled from the shadows. Jackson turned, smirking as he spotted a familiar face. Kira Elksey, leader of the renegade traders, and the kind of woman who could sell air to a vacuum. She was leaning against a table, arms crossed, her expression a mix of amusement and irritation. Kira, he greeted, trying not to sound too relieved. I'd say it's a pleasure, but I'm not that good a liar. Kira chuckled, a sound like shattered glass. Flattery, Creed, it'll get you nowhere, but I appreciate the effort. Slith slithered up beside Jackson, his scales reflecting the dim light like a disco ball from hell. Kira, it's been too long. Last I heard you were setting up shop on Epsilon 3. Couldn't stand the neighbors, she replied, her gaze shifting to the hulking form of Grax who loomed behind them like a storm cloud. And you brought muscle. Smart. Grax, Jackson introduced, gesturing at the bounty hunter. He's more into breaking heads than breaking bread, but he's on our side. For now. Charmed, Grax grunted, clearly out of his element in the realm of small talk. So what brings you to my corner of the galaxy? Kira asked, sipping something that smelled like engine degreaser. Revolution, Jackson replied, deadpan. Kira raised an eyebrow. Ambitious. And here I thought you were just another smuggler with delusions of grandeur. Delusions are all the rage these days, Jackson replied, his tone light despite the seriousness of their situation. Look, we've got something that could shake the council to its core, but we need help. And let me guess, Kira said, setting her drink down with a decisive clink. You think I'm just the right kind of idiot to help you? More like the right kind of genius with a penchant for chaos, Slith interjected, flashing a sharp-toothed grin. Kira considered this, her eyes narrowing thoughtfully. I'm listening. Jackson took a deep breath, the weight of his words settling over him. We have a council box. Inside, there's data that proves the council's been up to some seriously illegal shit. Genetic manipulation, planetary sterilization. The kind of stuff that makes a dictatorship look like a charity. And you want me to help you get this out, Kira said, finishing his thought. Exactly, Jackson nodded. We need someone who can get the data to the right people, someone who's got the resources to spread it far and wide. Kira drummed her fingers on the table, her mind clearly weighing the risks. You do realize if we get caught, we're all dead. That's the spirit, Jackson said, flashing a grin that was more grimace than anything else. But we've got something they don't. What's that? Kira asked, genuinely curious. Nothing left to lose, Jackson replied, shrugging as if their odds were better than they were. Kira laughed, the sound rich and full of mischief. All right, Creed, I'm in. But this better be worth it. Oh, it will be, Jackson assured her. Think of it as a chance to kick the biggest hornet's nest in the galaxy. And here I thought today was going to be boring, Kira said, a wicked glint in her eyes. With Kira on board, their motley crew felt a little less like a group of doomed outcasts and more like a team. The kind of team that might just pull off the impossible if sheer stubbornness counted for anything in the universe. What's the plan, then? Slith asked, his voice tinged with anticipation. Jackson leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. We need to create a distraction big enough to keep the Council's eyes off us while we transmit the data. Something that'll make him think twice before squashing us like bugs. How big a distraction are we talking? Grax asked, skepticism oozing from every syllable. The kind that makes headlines, Jackson replied, glancing at Kira for support. Kira nodded, her mind already racing ahead. I might know a guy who can help. They call him Pyro Pete. Like setting things on fire. Sounds like my kind of guy, Jackson said, a plan beginning to form. Pete's enthusiastic, Kira warned, her tone suggesting that enthusiastic was an understatement. Perfect, Jackson replied. We'll need enthusiasm if we're going to make this work. Slith grinned, his eyes alight with mischief. When do we start? Now, Jackson said, his resolve firming. The Council's had its thumb on the galaxy's pulse for too long. Time to give them a heart attack. As they left the bar, the reality of their mission settled in. They were about to take on the most powerful entity in the galaxy with nothing but a ragtag crew and a handful of data. The odds were terrible, the risks astronomical, and the chance of success almost non-existent. In other words, just another day in Jackson Creed's life. Their first stop was Pyro Pete's hideout, a place that smelled of burnt metal and bad decisions. Pete was a wiry man with a manic gleam in his eyes, and a finger always twitching toward the trigger of whatever incendiary device he happened to be holding. Kira, Pete exclaimed as they entered, his face splitting into a grin that showed more teeth than was strictly necessary. What brings you to my den of delights? Business, Pete, Kira replied, her tone all business. We need a fire, a big one. Pete's eyes lit up in a way that suggested he lived for moments like these. Oh, I can do big. How big we talking? Burning down the bazaar big. Let's not get carried away, Jackson interjected, wincing at the thought of torching their only cover. Just enough to keep the Council's lackeys busy. Moderation, Pete sighed, as if the word pained him. Fine, I can do that. What do you have in mind? A show, Jackson said, outlining their plan with quick, decisive strokes. Something that'll draw every eye in the bazaar. Pete nodded, already lost in thoughts of destruction. Consider it done. When do you need it? Yesterday, Slith quipped, earning a chuckle from Pete. With Pyro Pete set to create a spectacle, the rest of the crew focused on securing a location to transmit the data. Grax, who had connections in low places, suggested an old comms tower on the outskirts of the market, a relic from a time when the galaxy was just a little less chaotic. It's out of the way, Grax explained as he drove them to the site. No one uses it anymore, but the tech is still solid. Jackson peered out at the crumbling structure, its silhouette stark against the starlit sky. Perfect. Just the kind of place no one would think to look or care about, Slith added, his voice a low hiss. As they set up the necessary equipment, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing on the edge of a precipice. One wrong move and they'd fall into a void of their own making. Everything ready? Jackson asked, casting a nervous glance at Kira. "Ready as it'll ever be," she replied, her voice steady. They had a plan, a crew, and a chance, however slim, to pull this off. All they needed was for everything to go disastrously right. "Pete's in position," Grax reported, his fingers tapping out a rhythm against the console. "Show's about to start." Jackson nodded, his mind racing through the possibilities. "Let's light it up." As the first tendrils of smoke began to curl upwards, a distant explosion echoed through the bazaar, the sound followed by a burst of fire that painted the night sky in shades of orange and red. "The party started," Slith remarked, watching the chaos unfold. "Now or never," Jackson said, his voice tight with a mix of adrenaline and fear. Kira activated the comms array, the ancient system humming to life with a series of clicks and whirs. "We're live," she confirmed, fingers dancing across the controls. Jackson inserted the data shard, the terminal's screen flickering as it processed the information. A moment later, the data was streaming out into the galaxy, a beacon of truth in a universe built on lies. "It's working," Slith said, a rare note of awe in his voice. "Let's hope it stays that way," Jackson replied, his eyes fixed on the terminal. As the data flowed, they watched the bazaar from their vantage point, the flames climbing higher as Pyro Pete's handiwork drew every eye and ear in the vicinity. "Incoming," Grax warned, his gaze locked on the horizon. In the distance, the unmistakable figures of Council enforcers were closing in, their intent clear. "They know," Jackson said, the words a bitter taste in his mouth. "Then we better make this quick," Kira replied, her focus unbroken. Jackson nodded, his mind racing. "Slith, Grax, hold them off. Kira, keep the transmission going as long as you can. I'll handle the rest." With a sense of grim determination, they braced for the fight of their lives. The stakes had never been higher, and failure was not an option. As the first shots rang out, Jackson couldn't help but reflect on the absurdity of it all. Here they were, a mismatched crew of misfits, taking on the galaxy's most fearsome regime. It was madness, plain and simple, the kind of madness you only found in bad holo novels and desperate gambles. But sometimes, against all odds, madness was exactly what was needed. And with the Council breathing down their necks, they were about to find out just how far a little insanity could take them. The night was alive with chaos, the air thick with smoke and the promise of change. Whatever happened next, Jackson knew one thing for certain: they'd given the galaxy a chance. The rest was up to the universe. Here's hoping it has a sense of humor. The Starlight Bazaar was never known for its peace and quiet, but tonight it was a full-blown symphony of chaos, a cacophony of destruction that could only be described as the universe's middle finger to anyone seeking a calm night out. Jackson Creed, ever the optimist, had hoped for a bit of a ruckus. What they got was a full-scale riot, with Pyro Pete's fiery touch lighting up the place like a supernova at a fireworks show. Jackson huddled behind the dubious cover of a half-burnt stall, its previous owner having wisely decided that life was too short to be spent dodging flames and explosions. Slith was beside him, scales reflecting the inferno like a disco ball in a disaster movie. "Well, Jackson," Slith hissed, a grin splitting his reptilian face, "can't say we didn't deliver on our promise." "Yeah, we promised a distraction, not a goddamned apocalypse," Jackson muttered, peering over the edge of the debris. Council enforcers, clad in their usual black and gray, were swarming the area like locusts on a mission. Or maybe ants, better organized and more likely to ruin your picnic. "Council's not going to be handing out medals for this one," Jackson continued, ducking back as a blaster shot sizzled past, close enough to make him reconsider his life choices. Slith chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. "I doubt they'd be handing them out if they knew what was on that data shard either, or maybe they would." Posthumously. Let's focus on not making posthumous the word of the day, huh? Grax was nearby, doing what Grax did best, making life generally unpleasant for anyone who got too close. He was like a one-man army, a whirlwind of fists, blaster fire, and what might have been a few choice expletives in languages Jackson didn't even recognize. "Gotta say, Creed," Grax called out as he sent an enforcer sprawling. "You sure know how to pick your fights. Stick with me, Grax," Jackson shot back, "and you'll never run out of heads to bash. Just imagine all the therapy you're saving with every punch." Meanwhile, Kira was hunkered down at the comms tower, tapping into every reserve of ingenuity she had to keep the data flow uninterrupted. Occasional bursts of static crackled through the line, a reminder that technology and chaos rarely mixed well. Yet somehow, the transmission held steady, a beacon of truth amidst the insanity. Over the comms, Kira's voice crackled, as calm as if she were discussing the weather. "Transmission's holding, but we've got about as much time as a snowball in a supernova if we don't get these guys off our backs. Working on it," Jackson replied, his voice strained as he fired his blaster, not so much aiming as expressing his general displeasure with the Council's presence. Grax, ever the practical one, checked his blaster's charge with a grunt. "Hope you've got more tricks up your sleeve, Creed, 'cause I'm running out of bullets and patience in equal measure." "Patience was never your strong suit," Slith pointed out, casually kicking a fallen enforcer's weapon out of reach. "Or bullets, for that matter." "Well, Jackson," Grax said, turning to look at him with a humorless smile, "what's next?" "Please tell me it involves us not dying horribly." "Funny you should mention that," Jackson said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Kira, any chance of a plan B? Preferably one that doesn't involve us getting vaporized." The line crackled, and Jackson could almost hear Kira's smirk. Plan B might be an option if Pyro Pete's got any more surprises up his sleeve. He's Pyro Pete. "Of course he does," Jackson replied, not sure if he found that comforting or terrifying. "Guess we're in for one hell of an encore then," Slith added as they ducked another spray of blaster fire. Pyro Pete, it turned out, was more than just a man with a love for fire. He was a maestro of mayhem, a conductor of chaos, and like any good showman, he saved the best for last. A second explosion rocked the bazaar, larger and more spectacular than the first. It wasn't just a distraction, it was a declaration. The kind that said, "We're here, we're mad as hell, and by the way, your insurance policy doesn't cover acts of Pyro Pete." The enforcers faltered, clearly having second thoughts about their career choices. In the brief lull, Jackson seized the moment, gesturing for his companions to fall back. "Time to move, folks. Let's not overstay our welcome." Slith nodded, already backing away, his eyes darting for any sign of danger. "Not that we were very welcome to begin with." Grax snorted, a rare moment of levity amidst the chaos. "I think our welcome committee's busy putting out fires." They beat a hasty retreat, ducking through the labyrinthine alleys of the bazaar. Pyro Pete's final act had bought them time, but not much. The enforcers would regroup, and when they did, they'd come down hard. With the comms array still broadcasting their damning message, they needed to get out and fast. As they ran, a sudden thought struck Jackson, one of those insights that made you question the sanity of your own subconscious. "Hey, Slith, remind me to thank Pete next time we see him." Assuming there is a next time, Slith replied dryly, sidestepping a smoking pile of debris. "Optimism. I like it. Who knows, maybe we'll even get a group discount on therapy." They reached a junction, and Jackson paused, glancing between the two routes. One led deeper into the bazaar, a tangle of stalls and shadows. The other was more open but likely crawling with enforcers. "Kira, which way?" Jackson asked, hoping she had a better sense of direction than his gut. His gut was usually more interested in telling him about the lack of lunch than life-saving exits. "Left," came her reply, less obvious. "More cover." "Left it is," Jackson said, leading the way. As they ran, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter, swallowed by the din of the bazaar's chaos. It wasn't much, but it was a start. They moved with purpose, each step taking them further from the heart of the firestorm they'd unleashed. Kira's voice broke through the comms, a note of urgency cutting through the static. "Transmission's nearly done. We've got to wrap this up before they cut us off." Copy that, Jackson replied, his mind racing. They needed an exit strategy, something that didn't involve becoming a permanent part of the bazaar's landscape. Grax, Jackson called, his voice pitched low. Any bright ideas on getting us out of here alive? Grax grunted, barely sparing a glance back. Always with the optimism creed. Makes me wonder why I stick around. Must be my charming personality, Jackson quipped, ducking under a low-hanging awning as they raced through a narrow alley. Or your complete disregard for anything resembling a plan, Grax countered, a hint of amusement in his voice. Plans are overrated, Jackson said, taking a sharp right. Surprise is our ally, good because we've got plenty of that. Not sure they teach improvisation in council school, Slith added, keeping pace with a slithering agility that made Jackson a little envious. Council school, Jackson mused. Probably more lectures on crushing dissent than on chasing renegades. They are out of their league. They'll adapt, Grax warned, the edge returning to his voice. They always do. Then we stay unpredictable, Jackson replied, vaulting over a stack of crates. Unpredictable and annoying. They emerged into a larger thoroughfare, the chaos a little less immediate but no less threatening. The bazaar was alive with confusion, smoke, and the occasional panic shout. Jackson scanned their surroundings, looking for a way out. Creed, Kira's voice cut in again, more urgent this time. Transmissions complete. We did it. Relief washed over him, tempered by the reality of their situation. Great. Now we just have to survive. Easy, right? Slith said with a sardonic lilt as they pressed on, searching for the exit. Like taking candy from a rabid warg, Jackson muttered. Their path led them towards the bazaar's fringes, the stalls growing sparser, the shadows deeper. It was quieter here, the sounds of chaos muted by distance and intervening structures. As they slowed to catch their breath, Jackson took stock. They'd sent the message, dealt the blow, but the reprisal was sure to follow. The council didn't take kindly to being embarrassed, and they had long memories and longer arms. Everyone still in one piece? Jackson asked, glancing around the group. More or less, Slith replied, inspecting a singed scale with mild interest. Grax. Jackson prompted, seeing the big man frowning into the distance. Grax nodded, though his expression remained grim. For now, but we're not out of this yet. Jackson followed Grax's gaze, spotting the telltale silhouettes of enforcers regrouping. They hadn't given up far from it. The chase was still on, and the odds were as dire as they'd ever been. Faster than I'd hoped, Jackson admitted, drawing his blaster. Hope's a funny thing, Grax said, hefting his weapon. It's what keeps us alive and the first thing to die in a fight. Then we keep fighting, Slith declared, his voice steely. If they want us, they'll have to come get us. Preferably without getting us first, Jackson added, his tone dry as the dust under his boots. Kira's voice chimed in over the comms, a welcome presence amidst the tension. We've got to move. I've got a ship ready to go, but it won't wait forever. Coordinates? Jackson asked, already calculating the best route. She rattled off the location, a spot near the bazaar's outer perimeter. It wasn't far, but the way was fraught with danger. Jackson glanced at his crew, seeing the resolve mirrored in their eyes. All right, folks, he said, setting his jaw. Time to run the gauntlet. Let's make it out of here and show the galaxy we're not just punching bags for the council. With a collective nod, they set off, their footsteps echoing through the narrow alleyways. Every shadow was a potential threat, every corner a trap waiting to be sprung. But they pressed on, driven by the knowledge that they'd struck a blow for something greater than themselves. The galaxy was a harsh, unforgiving place, but it was theirs to reclaim. One explosive, chaotic step at a time. The Starlight Bazaar was the kind of place where you could find anything from a vintage blaster to questionable pastas in the same stall. Today, it was also a place where you could find Jackson Creed running for his life, which was slightly less usual but increasingly common. Why do we always end up running? Grax panted, lagging just a step behind, his massive frame thundering through the chaos like a freight train that had seen better days. Jackson could have made a quip about exercise being good for the soul, but they had plenty of those on this job already. Besides, he was too busy scanning for their way out and simultaneously trying to ignore the mild protest of his own lungs. Slith, ahead and moving with an ease that seemed like a cosmic joke at Jackson's expense, called back, "If you're gonna die, might as well be with a view, eh?" The enforcers, loyal lapdogs of the council in their drab uniforms, were regrouping like a swarm of particularly grumpy bees. Only these bees came with blasters and a determination fueled by probable bonuses for bringing back rebel heads. Jackson ducked behind a riotously colored awning, heart pounding louder than Pyro Pete's explosions. The council's enforcers were like fashion critics at a thrift store, unforgiving and ever-present. "We need a plan," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. From somewhere above, Kira's voice crackled through the comms. "I've got eyes on your six, and it looks like you've got more friends than usual." "You must be popular today. Everyone loves a good underdog," Jackson replied, peering out from behind their temporary refuge. "Though I prefer to be the kind that doesn't get shot." "You know, I was just thinking," Slith chimed in, slinking over with a grin that was all teeth and no promise of comfort. "If we just surrender, maybe they'll make us disappear faster than a politician's promise." Jackson cut him off. "Yeah, not my idea of a good time. Spoil sport," Slith said, maintaining that toothy grin. "I'm sure they'd throw in free refreshments." Grax, to his credit, was keeping an eye on the retreating enforcers. "We need to find a way to even the odds, preferably one that doesn't involve us getting shot." Jackson consulted the battered data shard tucked inside his jacket. It held secrets that could unravel the Council's tightly wound grip on the galaxy. Problem was, exposing those secrets also painted a target bigger than a cargo freighter on their backs. The comms buzzed again. "There's a weak spot in their network we can exploit," Kira said, her voice a lifeline wrapped in static. "It's risky, but would you turn down a chance to kick the Council in its metaphorical rear end?" Jackson didn't hesitate. "You know me, Kira. If there's a chance to annoy them, I'm all in." "Thought you'd say that. Sending you a link now. Let's see if human ingenuity can outsmart their overpaid tech geeks." "Human ingenuity or human idiocy," Grax grumbled, scanning the streets ahead. "Tomato, tomato," Slith shrugged, looking every bit the lizard who'd just spotted a particularly juicy fly. Jackson connected the Council box to the terminal and accessed the data shard. The interface flickered to life, a labyrinth of codes and security measures that screamed unauthorized access prohibited in a dozen languages. "Okay, folks," Jackson said, fingers flying over the keys, "time to put this forbidden tech to good use." Grax nodded, though his skepticism was as plain as the scowl on his face. "Let's hope their tech guys are as lazy as their paperwork suggests." "I'd bet my blaster on it," Jackson replied, a grin tugging at his lips despite the situation. The screen before him blinked, a soft chime announcing success, a backdoor into the Council's system. It was a flaw, a vulnerability they hadn't accounted for in their arrogance. Human tech, pieced together with spit, grit, and a sprinkle of desperation, found a way in. "Would you look at that?" Slith said, leaning over Jackson's shoulder with a gleeful hiss. They left the back door open. Jackson couldn't help but laugh. Amateurs. He quickly unleashed a swarm of digital chaos into their systems. It wasn't a weapon in the traditional sense, but to those reliant on order and control, it might as well have been. "Let's see how they like a taste of their own medicine," Jackson said, watching as the Council's network sputtered and reeled under the unexpected assault. Grax's gleeful chuckle rumbled up like distant thunder. "I love the smell of disruption in the morning." Their triumph, however, was cut short by the telltale whine of blaster fire. "Looks like they're not done with us yet," Jackson said, ducking as a bolt sizzled past. "Of course not," Slith replied almost cheerfully. "We're the stars of the show, after all." The enforcers, momentarily disoriented by the sudden malfunction of their communications, regrouped quickly. They hadn't survived this long by underestimating their quarry. "Time to move," Jackson urged, pocketing the terminal. "Kira, status on that ship almost there, but you'll need to shake those fleas first," Kira replied. "I'm keeping the engines warm, but not gonna lie, they're closing in." Wouldn't be a proper escape if the odds were even remotely in our favor, Jackson muttered, leading the charge once more. They darted through the bazaar's tangled corridors, the explosions and chaos diminishing behind them. They were heading for the perimeter, where Kira's ship was prepped for an exit not exactly cleared by the local authorities. "Grax, think you can give us a little breathing room?" Jackson called back, trying to balance optimism with the reality of the situation. "With pleasure," Grax said, his blaster a constant punctuation to their retreat, discouraging any enforcer inclined to get too close. Slith cleared a corner with a fluidity that defied logic, already scouting ahead. "I see our ride," he called back, excitement threading his voice. "And it's not even on fire." "Well, that's a first," Jackson said, guiding them towards the ship, a patched-up freighter that looked more likely to fall apart than fly but had surprises under its beat-up exterior. Much like them, really. The sight of it was a promise, a glimmer of hope in the storm they'd stirred up. But hope was a fragile thing, often squashed under the heavy boot of reality. With the enforcers closing in, each step felt like a gamble. Would they make it? Would the ship hold together long enough to get them out of this mess? Would they survive to see another day where they'd have the luxury of regretting their choices? "Brace yourselves," Jackson said, heart thudding with the rhythm of survival. "We're almost there." They sprinted for the ship, the hatch sliding open with a mechanical groan that perfectly echoed Jackson's own sentiments. Inside, Kira waited, her fingers dancing over the controls like a maestro at an organ of barely held-together metal. "Welcome aboard, gentlemen," she greeted with a grin, not missing a beat. "Please keep all limbs inside the vehicle until we reach our cruising altitude." "Glad you could make it," Jackson said, sliding into the co-pilot's seat with a grace that spoke more of exhaustion than elegance. "Wasn't gonna leave you behind, was I?" Kira shot back. She flicked a switch and the engines roared to life, a sound both comforting and terrifying in its sheer volume. "Let's hope your piloting's better than your jokes," Slith said, collapsing into a seat with a dramatic sigh. Jackson watched as the bazaar shrank behind them, the enforcers becoming little more than dots in the chaos. The makeshift interference they'd injected into the Council's network was buying them precious seconds, and as the ship shuddered into the sky, he allowed himself a moment of relief. "Who knew human scrap tech could be our savior?" Slith mused, peering out a viewport. "We did." Eventually Jackson replied, the tension in his shoulders easing if only slightly. "Now let's keep it that way." Grax settled in, his eyes never leaving the retreating scene. "What's next, Creed? We've poked the beehive. They'll be coming for us." Jackson nodded, acknowledging the truth in Grax's words. "Yeah, well, I've always wanted to see how fast this ship can go. Consider this a test run, test run." Kira laughed, adjusting their trajectory. "You boys sure know how to pick your moments." The ship soared higher, leaving the chaos of the Starlight Bazaar behind, their bodies pressed back into their seats by the acceleration. Outside, stars blinked into existence, cold and indifferent witnesses to their escape. "So what's the plan, fearless leader?" Slith asked, his tone light but his eyes sharp and assessing. Jackson stared out at the void, his mind already racing ahead. The Council was wounded but not defeated. Their grip on the galaxy was still ironclad, but now there was a crack, a flaw they hadn't accounted for, something he and his motley crew could exploit. "We regroup." "We plan," Jackson said, determination hardening his voice. "We find a way to turn that crack into a chasm." "Sounds easy enough," Grax said dryly. "And while we're at it, maybe we can solve world hunger and bring peace to the universe. One revolution at a time," Jackson replied, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his lips. The ship's engines hummed with a comforting certainty, propelling them into the unknown. It was a fragile peace, a temporary reprieve from the chaos they'd wrought, but it was enough for now. As they settled into the journey, Jackson closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of their actions settling over him like a familiar cloak. They'd done the impossible, defied the Council with their ragtag band of rebels and scavenged tech. And now, as the galaxy stretched out before them, endless and unyielding, they prepared to do it all over again. After all, there was a certain thrill in being the underdog, in knowing that with each step they were shaping the future, one reckless, unpredictable move at a time. The stars outside Jackson's viewport blurred into streaks as Kira deftly maneuvered the patched-up freighter through the chaotic remnants of the Starlight Bazaar. Engine thrumming beneath the deck, it was more like a tin can with delusions of grandeur than a spaceship. But hey, delusions sometimes got you out alive. "So, Creed," Kira said, not taking her eyes off the console. "What's the plan?" "Besides the obvious don't die." Jackson leaned back, rubbing his temples like a man trying to coax sense out of a particularly stubborn hangover. "We've got this," he said, holding up the data shard. "And the world's most glorified piece of scrap tech," he added, gesturing to the council box. "We turn their own secrets against them." Slith chuckled from his corner, where he was cautiously inspecting a panel with more scorch marks than functioning lights. "You make it sound so easy, like making a souffle in zero-G. Can't be harder than dealing with you lot," Jackson shot back, a grin tugging at his lips. "We've got a network to crash and an empire to shake." Grax, settled like an immovable mountain next to the ship's only exit, raised a skeptical eyebrow. "You seriously thinking of broadcasting this stuff? You'd have better luck teaching a rock to sing." Jackson shrugged. "Rocks don't have dirt on the council, true," Grax conceded, a rare twinkle in his eye. "But they're less likely to get shot." "Well, there goes my next career move," Jackson muttered, pulling up a screen on the terminal. The council's network was still reeling from their earlier tampering. It was a beautiful mess, broken lines of code, security alerts flashing like a bad disco. A window of opportunity if you squinted just right. "Slith, you're the creep who knows his way around tech," Jackson said. "Think you can rig a broadcast through this?" Slith sidled over, flicking a tongue at the terminal. "Kids play," he said, cracking his knuckles. "Just gotta find the right channels, make sure the council's finest can't trace it back here. Spread the gift of enlightenment free of charge, or charge them extra," Kira added with a wink. "We are renegade traders, after all." Jackson watched as Slith worked. The terminal's screen danced with data, his fingers flying over it like a pianist coaxing a tune from a particularly reluctant instrument. Each beep and click brought them closer to putting the council's dirty laundry on full display. "Almost there," Slith murmured, his focus absolute. "Just need to bypass their mainframe's firewall." "Those words mean nothing to me," Grax said. "But you have my full support if it means embarrassing those smug bastards." Jackson checked the ship's trajectory. They were skirting the outer reaches of the bazaar now, far enough away from immediate danger but close enough that he felt its pull, like a bad habit he couldn't quite shake. "All right," Slith announced, stepping back. "We're live. All we need now is your charming voice to ruin some very powerful people's day." Jackson nodded, taking a deep breath. He wasn't one for speeches, but desperate times called for desperate measures, and possibly desperate improvisation. He adjusted the ship's comms, tapping into the frequency Slith had rigged. "Greetings, Galaxy," he began, his voice bouncing across countless channels. "This is Jackson Creed, your friendly neighborhood thorn in the council's side. You've heard about the council's iron-fisted control, their benevolent smiles hiding teeth sharper than a politician's promises. Well, we've got the receipts." He paused for effect, aware that this would be the point where the council was likely scrambling, trying to jam the signal, shut him down. "Too late, suckers. We've got proof," he continued, his voice steady, "of their corruption, manipulation, and all the other delightful things they've been doing behind closed doors. Genetic manipulation, planetary sterilization, real horror show stuff. And now you do too." Kira's eyes flicked to Jackson, something like admiration crossing her face. "Bold move, Creed." "Yeah, well," Jackson shrugged, "it's not like I had anything better to do today." He cut the transmission, letting the data shard do its work. It was flooding the network with information, sending out packets across the galaxy, to news feeds, trading posts, anywhere someone might be listening. Anywhere someone might care. Now what? Grax asked, arms crossed like a wall of muscle and suspicion. Now we wait, Jackson replied, and hope that enough people are pissed off to do something about it. Slith leaned back, his expression a mix of satisfaction and apprehension. Just wait for the fireworks. Because the council's not gonna take this lying down. They never do, Kira added. She took the ship into a gentle arc, bringing them out of the bazaar's shadow and into open space. But we've played our hand. Let's see how they react. Jackson watched the stars outside, feeling the weight of their actions, the risk they'd taken. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making a stand. He couldn't help but feel a surge of something akin to hope, dangerous and exhilarating in equal measure. Think it'll work? Grax asked, his voice low and serious. If it doesn't, Jackson replied, we'll have a hell of a time running from what comes next. As if to punctuate his point, the ship's console beeped. Kira frowned, tapping a few keys. Got incoming alerts, she announced. Looks like everyone and their second cousin's getting the message. Good, Jackson said, though the knots in his stomach weren't so sure. Let them see what the council's been up to. The minutes ticked by, each one a silent scream in the void. Jackson could almost hear the galaxy collectively holding its breath. Their message was out, but what came next was anyone's guess. Revolts, riots, or, knowing their luck, a mass effort to hunt down the fools who dared to speak up. Grax broke the silence, his voice a rumble of curiosity. What's the endgame here, Jackson? We're not exactly equipped to lead a revolution. No, Jackson agreed. But we can damn well start one. Kira adjusted their course, her hands nimble and sure. We're getting responses, she said, her tone a mix of surprise and satisfaction. People are listening. Funny thing about tyrants, Slith mused, they never realize how many people want to see them fall until it's too late. They'll come for us, Grax warned, though there was a glint of something like anticipation in his eyes. Let them, Jackson said, the thrill of the fight igniting within him. With any luck, we'll be long gone. The ship's sensors lit up, alerting them to multiple ships on an intercept course. Enforcers, most likely, sent to silence them before they could do more damage. Time to see what this bucket can really do, Kira said, a wicked grin on her face. The freighter vibrated with the strain as she pushed it to its limits, threading a needle through the stars. Jackson watched the incoming blips on the radar, each one a reminder of the price of defiance. But damned if it didn't feel good to be the thorn in the council's side for once. Any bets on how long we last? Slith asked, half joking as he adjusted the shields. Long enough, Jackson replied, his focus unyielding. Kira's hands were a blur over the controls, coaxing every last ounce of speed from their beleaguered ship. Keep your seats, gentlemen. This might get bumpy. The enforcers closed in, their sleek ships a stark contrast to the freighter's patched-up hull. But with Slith's modifications and Kira's skill, they were a harder target than they seemed. Shields holding? Grax asked, checking their systems. Like a stubborn old mule, Slith replied, and just as temperamental, Jackson held onto the terminal, watching their pursuers with a mix of trepidation and exhilaration. They'd lit a fire, and now it was a race to see who got burned first. Here we go, Kira said. Her voice barely contained excitement. The freighter juked and rolled, dodging blaster fire with a grace that belied its appearance. Jackson felt the adrenaline surge, the thrill of the chase, the intoxicating dance between life and death. Remind me to never doubt you guys again, Jackson said, clutching the armrest as the ship banked hard, skimming the edge of an asteroid field. Don't worry, Grax replied, his grin fierce. We'll remind you. As the enforcers tried to close the gap, Kira veered into the asteroid belt, using the massive rocks as both shield and weapon. The ship's frame shuddered with each near miss, but they powered through, fueled by sheer audacity and a little bit of lunacy. Out of the chaos, a new sound emerged, communications from other ships, other planets, acknowledging their broadcast. People were listening, people were angry. The council had pushed too far and the galaxy was waking up to the truth. We did it, Slith said, the disbelief in his voice mirrored by the smile that stretched his lips. We actually did it. Hell yeah, we did, Jackson replied, the weight of their gamble transforming into something lighter, something like hope. Ahead, the asteroid field gave way to open space, and beyond that, a multitude of ships, some aggressive, some cautious, but all converging towards one purpose: answers, justice, change. The Council's grip was slipping, and all because a few renegades decided to poke the beast with a stick. What now? Grax asked, his eyes scanning the void. Now we see if the galaxy's as tired of the Council's crap as we are, Jackson said, his determination unshaken. And if it is, we ride the wave. The freighter soared onward, the stars bearing witness to their defiance. It was a small step, a single act of rebellion in the vast tapestry of the universe. But sometimes that's all it took to spark a revolution. And if they went down, well, they'd go down swinging. The aftermath was a mess. The kind of mess that made you wonder if the universe was actually a cosmic toddler with a penchant for knocking over the carefully arranged dominoes of life. The Starlight Bazaar wasn't just a place of commerce anymore. It was a testament, damn, there's that dreaded phrase again, to the chaos that Jackson and his ragtag crew had stirred up. But hey, at least it was a testament to something, right? Jackson stood at the edge of what used to be a bustling thoroughfare, now a ruin. The kind of ruin that archaeologists in 1,000 years would dig up and write the seas about, complete with wild speculations on the primitive culture that thought selling bootleg blasters next to alien delicacies was a viable business model. He adjusted his jacket, the one he picked off a corpse back on Dacron Roman 4. You know, for sentimental reasons. Well, ain't this a party, Slith said, coming up beside him. Slith had a knack for understatement, which was probably why he was still alive. That, and his uncanny ability to make forbidden tech do things it wasn't designed to do, like broadcast incriminating data across the galaxy. Yeah, Jackson replied, scanning the debris. If by party you mean a catastrophe we barely survived. Slith grinned, his teeth a row of crooked gravestones. Gotta hand it to you, Jackson, you sure know how to make an exit, Jackson shrugged. I've always had a flair for the dramatic, and hey, at least the Council's got bigger problems than us now. Grax joined them, arms crossed and looking like a disgruntled boulder. They're not gonna forget this, you know. We're on their list now. Oh, we've been on their list for ages, Jackson said. We're just finally at the top. Kira Elksey sauntered over, her easy confidence the only thing about the current situation that felt solid. Word is spreading, she announced, holding up a comm device that looked like it had seen better days. And it's not just the dirt on the Council. People are waking up. Good, Jackson said. About time someone set fire to their ivory tower. Speaking of fire, Pyro Pete chimed in, appearing as if conjured by the mention of his favorite element. Think we should torch the rest of the bazaar, for old time's sake. Let's save the pyrotechnics for when they send more enforcers our way, Kira suggested, smirking. Besides, we might need this place if things don't go as planned. Jackson watched the remnants of the bazaar, the structures that had withstood more than just the test of time, but had finally succumbed to the weight of truth. He felt a twinge of something, pride, maybe, mixed with the usual cocktail of dread and anticipation. They'd done something big, something that would echo across the galaxy long after they were gone. Do you think it matters? Grax asked, his voice low, serious. All this, the message we sent, Jackson considered the question, the weight of it. It's not about the message itself, he finally said. It's about the fact that people are listening, that they care enough to want things to change. Change, Kira mused, looking up at the sky where ships darted about like frenzied insects. That's the tricky part. Getting folks riled up is one thing, but keeping the momentum, that's where the real work begins. Slith nodded, his expression thoughtful. And we sparked something. Might not be enough to topple the Council overnight, but it's a start. Just like Jackson's love life, Pyro Pete quipped, earning a snort from Grax. Hey, that was one time, Jackson protested, though his laughter betrayed him. And she was a very convincing hologram, Kira chuckled, shaking her head. You lot are hopeless. Hopeless, Jackson echoed, savoring the irony. Yeah, maybe, but at least we're hopeless with a cause. The freighter loomed in the distance, its battered hull a testament, damn, there it is again, to their resilience. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and it had gotten them this far. Now it was time to see how far they could take it. You think the Council will retaliate? Slith asked, glancing at Jackson. Retaliate? Jackson chuckled darkly. Oh, I'm counting on it, but by the time they get their act together we'll be 3 systems over, sipping who knows what on some backwater planet. And when they find us, Grax pressed, ever the skeptic. We improvise, Jackson said. It's what we're best at. Kira rolled her eyes, though there was no malice in it. You're a damn fool, Creed. Yeah, but I'm your damn fool. They made their way back to the ship, steps heavy yet filled with purpose. The freighter might have been a tin can with delusions of grandeur, but right now it was home. And home was where they needed to be. As they boarded, Jackson took one last look at the bazaar, now a symbol of both destruction and potential rebirth. If nothing else, they'd left a mark. Maybe not one of grace or elegance, but a mark nonetheless. And wasn't that what life was about? Leaving your footprint, even if it's in the mud. The ship's interior hummed with life and the clatter of repairs. Slith was already at the helm, tweaking the systems to ensure they didn't fall apart mid-flight. Grax settled into his usual spot, arms crossed, ready for whatever came next. Kira took the pilot's seat, the cockpit her throne, and Pyro Pete shuffled off to do whatever it was he did when not actively setting things on fire. Jackson sat at the comms, feeling the weight of the data shard in his pocket. It was empty now, its secrets broadcasted for the galaxy to judge. But it was also a reminder of what they'd done and what they still had to do. So, Slith said, glancing back as he set the coordinates. Any last words before we dive headfirst into the unknown? Jackson grinned. Yeah, don't screw it up. With that, the freighter lifted off, leaving behind the ruins of the bazaar. As it ascended into the blackness of space, Jackson allowed himself a moment of hope, because in the end, that's all they had, hope and a ship held together by duct tape and dreams. The galaxy was a big place, big enough for change, big enough for them, and maybe, just maybe, big enough for a little chaos to set things right. But one thing was certain, they weren't done yet, not by a long shot. As they sailed into the void, Jackson felt that familiar thrill, the pull of the unknown. It wasn't just about escaping the Council's reach. It was about carving out a place where they could be free, where they could make a difference. Think we'll find it? Kira asked, breaking the silence. Find what? That place, she clarified. The one we're always talking about, where things make sense. Jackson considered it, the enormity of it. Maybe. Or maybe we'll just keep running until we find somewhere close enough. Kira nodded, satisfied for now. The freighter hummed beneath them, a clunky promise of adventures yet to come. Let's make this one count, Slith said, his voice carrying the weight of their shared struggles. Always do, Jackson replied, settling back into his seat. The galaxy was wide open, a canvas of infinite possibilities. For better or worse, they were a part of it now, and there was no turning back. Here we go, Kira announced, the ship surging forward, engines roaring with life. And with that they were off, leaving behind the wreckage of their past for the uncertain promise of what lay ahead. It was reckless, it was dangerous, and it was exactly what they needed. In the end, it wasn't about the Council or the fights they picked. It was about the journey, the friends they made along the way, and the chance to be something more than just another forgotten face in the crowd. Jackson Creed, Slith, Grax, Kira Elksey, and Pyro Pete. Their names might not go down in history, but they were damn well going to make sure they were remembered, at least by the people who mattered, because the galaxy needed a reminder. That even in the darkest corners of space, there existed those who refused to bow down, who dared to dream of something better. And Jackson, for all his cynicism, wouldn't have had it any other way.